tell them. What up, though, everybody? This is Dwayne Barnes, MPA, and I am here, like I promised, to offer African American Studies 477 independent study, economics of Jim Crow. I am excited to have you join us today. There are a few ways to interact with this course. I started the process by offering the course via Google Meets. I've since changed that, and you can find it on either my YouTube page, and there'll be a link to it, or my Facebook. There's a Facebook event page. The good thing about this course is it's a live and an on-demand course. I know that Saturdays or Sundays at 1 aren't convenient for everybody. So this course is going to serve two purposes. One for the live audience that's getting it now, straight from me. And then one for the on-demand audience, where you can find it on my Facebook page or Facebook event and my YouTube page, the Idea Exchange, and there'll be links for that on either page. Also, there's going to be a Facebook group where we can build community and talk more about the lessons, share ideas, etc. And so I'm excited about that. So I want to talk about, before I got started with the hard stuff, is just, one, level setting and saying thanks for joining. I appreciate everybody having the time and want to be a part of it. To my Google Meets fam, we are going to navigate the conversation to my YouTube page or to my Facebook page. And if you're in the Google Meets, I'm going to have a link where you can find my YouTube page, or you can find my Facebook page. So if you're in the Google Meets, you're going to see a link pop into your chat. Jump into that link, and we're going to have the conversation over there. In about 30 minutes through the class, I'm going to end the Google Meets, and we'll just have everybody over on this side. I want to thank everybody again for joining us, and I want to get started on why I'm doing this in the first place. So if you saw my intro video, you heard me say that, we're living in a time that is very tumultuous, to say the least. But, this course and our actions are not just in response to that. We're being proactive and looking at a future and looking at a present that is going to look a little different than it has before. So this isn't just a response to what's going on politically. This is a proactive step to say, you know what, this is the perfect time to start to think about what tomorrow is going to look like and how we plan to do that. My contribution to this conversation, being an African American Studies major, I studied at Howard University and at EMU, and I got my MPA from Oakland University. And any of the work that you've seen on this YouTube page or my Facebook page has been centered around that. I had a Next Narrative 313 podcast that was sponsored by the Skillman Foundation. You may have seen my Idea Exchange podcast, where we look at contemporary culture through the lens of African American politics, tech, culture, etc. And then also any of the one-offs that I've done one, Wait Till I Get My Money Right, about the tech report, tech policy, social technology ventures. So, all the things that I've done have been centered around our culture, our history, and our future. This course is going to provide an opportunity for us to look back at a time where our rights, where our economic opportunities and our social and political opportunities were in flux, in a position that we hope not to go back to, of Jim Crow. This course is going to follow the timeline of American history from slavery. And I use 1619 as a rough date to start. I know 1512 has kind of been another date that you can tinker with, as far as, Africans being brought to this country in a free or a servitude capacity, but I'm using 1619. And I'll drop a link for the 1619 project in my notes after we're done. and we're going to end it at 1954, the birth of civil rights. And I'm calling that the birth of civil rights because we're talking about Brown versus the Board of Education. We will go forward after that, but this 4-lecture series is going to focus primarily on Jim Crow time. So about the end of Reconstruction, about 1877 till about 1954. What was unique about that time was, and not to give, the whole lesson before we go, after slavery, there was a time of Reconstruction, and the Reconstruction era was the explosive time for African Americans in a political, in a financial and economic, and in a social capacity, due to the North winning the war and having their sights on punishing the South by, I won't say enriching, but allowing for personhood and freedomhood of the former slave. There were amendments to the Constitution. There were civil rights acts that allowed for us to move in a way that we never had in this country. And when that ended, when Reconstruction ended around 1877, it was like 2 steps forward, 100 steps back, and we saw black codes, and a lot of what was going on, land taken, economic opportunities thwarted. But during that time, we had economic, political, and social thought that led to us having a very explosive economic foundations during that time. And you've heard of Black Wall Street, or you heard of Durham, or you heard of these other kind of things happening during that time. And we're going to showcase and case study some of that material. What I think I want to take away from this is, regardless of the outcomes, regardless of what politics, regardless of what's happening, we've always been a people to find a way. We've always been a people to navigate, and we've always been one to create. And so that's a part of the perspective that I want to share. Another part of this perspective I learned through being a part of Be Me community. In 2018, I was a fellow there. And prior to that, my father-in-law was a fellow maybe 3, 4, 5 years before that here in the city of Detroit. Trabian Shorters is an intellectual that I admire, and he brought forth the idea of asset framing. And asset framing is simply, in my understanding, describing a people and who they are by what they aspire to, not by their limitations. So I'm saying that to say, in U.S. history and in our history, there's been a lot of opportunities to look at it from a perspective of a non-asset framing, where you're looking at the hurt, the pain, the trials, the tribulations. While they are there and we will acknowledge them, we will never identify our people or our struggle by the deficits, but by the assets. So when you say, somebody went from slavery to Reconstruction, and they went from Reconstruction to Jim Crow, well, you know what? During that time, our ambitions didn't change. Our want for freedom didn't change. Our want for economic freedom didn't change, though we were in those different kind of situations. So we're definitely going to asset frame it. We're going to look at history through that lens, and this is an economic conversation. So this conversation is going to be more of a social, political one, drenched with some economics. But as we move forward and talk Reconstruction, and as we move forward and talk Jim Crow, we're going to be case studying successful African-American enterprises, cities, time periods during that time, people during that time, and looking for, connecting on, trying to find a connection to say, okay, am I more Du Boisian in my thoughts and in my actions? And do I agree more with Marcus Garvey and his philosophy? Or am I more, pull yourself up by your bootstraps right where you are in Booker T. Washington? And like I said, we're gonna mix in a little Frederick Douglass in that on the front end. I said a lot there. I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge everyone here, and I want to share my screen and bring up some of our goals and objectives for this course. So give me just a moment here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. You may see a couple things on my screen. Don't hold it against me. That's kind of how we do. We keep the tabs up because it's a lot of information we're trying to get across. Let's see here. I think this is the screen I want to share. Let's see. I think I'm showing the right thing on my screen. Give me just a second to confirm that. Okay, I don't think I'm sharing the right screen here. Give me just a second. Okay, here we go. This should be it. This is the course overview and goals and objectives for our time together. Here we go. Perfect. Oh, those are my notes. Let's get, here we go, right here. Perfect. So you should be seeing African American Studies 477, Economics of Jim Crow. I am the professor here, Dwayne Barnes. We talked about my credentials. And so let's talk about a course description. So this course, and I'll make it a little bit bigger just in case we need to see it. This course examines the economic philosophies of Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey and their impact on Black economic progress during the Jim Crow era. We explore the successes, challenges, and the strategies highlighting, Black business achievements from Reconstruction through civil rights. My objectives are to examine economic impact of Jim Crow laws on African Americans from the end of Reconstruction to civil rights, explore the challenges and obstacles faced by Black entrepreneurs during this time period, as well as strategize tactics they employed to advance economic success, and then analyze the role of economic empowerment in fueling social movements and advancing civil rights for African Americans. Again, an outline of the course, we will look at slavery today from 1619 to 1885, and that's a lot to pack into a 1 hour kind of course. So we're going to be moving through it pretty fast. Also, we're going to look at the economics of Reconstruction in number 2. Class number 2, 1865 to 1877. And there we'll have a robust conversation about the policies and the laws that allowed for African Americans to really kind of level up during that time in the war-torn South. And then the final 2 discussions will be Jim Crow economics, 1877 to 1900, the turn of the century, and then from 1900 to 1954. Again, stopping at 54, because for me, that's the official start for me of civil rights when you see Brown versus the Board of Education. Again, to my people on Google Meet, we want to navigate this conversation over to my Facebook or my YouTube page. So there should be a link in the chat where you can leave this, click the link, leave this meeting and go over to my YouTube or my Facebook page. There we can continue to have discussion. There we continue to have a discussion, and you can follow me along. I just want to make sure we navigate from this Google Meet to our Facebook and my YouTube page. And I'm just reminding my people there. So today, we have a quick outline for today's work. In our conversation today, we're going to talk about, enslaved Americans, the legal and economic realities, the type of labor. There's a law and a war timeline that I want us to get through. Look at the North's role in slavery, abolition, abolition in the North's capacity, and then abolition through our lens, through Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and Frederick Douglass. And then finally look at, how those changing times afforded Black education. So that's a setup for today. And I'm going to pause just a moment, and I'm going to get my deck up. So I definitely want to start there, and then from there we'll be ready to roll. So I'm going to share my screen again, and it'll be for our deck that we'll be using for today's conversation. Perfect. So I'm going to start to share my screen, and I'm going to pull my notes, and we'll be ready to roll. It's the cool thing about having my dual screens up. I can do more than one thing at a time. So again, here we are. So we're going to look at some of the legal and economic realities of slavery. What really comes down to me in this part of our conversation is that there was no economic, political, or social rights for enslaved Africans here in America during that time. We were considered property. If you go back and you look at the Constitution, property ownership was a central core piece of that document. And outside of land, outside of other things of that regard, human property was a big part of that discussion. So we were seen as chattel, we were seen as property, no economic rights, no means to make a living, none of that stuff. So, it was a very tough time for African Americans, as you think of them in that regard. As we move forward in our discussion, the economic impact on slavery was such a big thing. Like when you think of America, you think about an economic engine. Well, one of the first births of that economic engine was through enslaved labor. Think about it. You had a very low overhead. You could produce as many as you wanted. And depending on where you were, you could drive them until the day that they died. So it was a system that was very it was unlike any other slavery I think we'd ever seen on the globe to that point. And it's something that even through that, our people have been able to navigate. So, the profits from slave-driven culture enable plantation owners, I don't call them masters, I call them plantation owners, to invest in infrastructure and industry, significantly contributing to the economic development of both the southern and the northern states. And we'll talk more about the northerns play in it as we go. It was an interconnected system. Anytime that you have a country kind of driven in half by their economic output, you're going to have a mixing of the two. So even, when the North started to have another idea about how they wanted to go about it, you still benefited from slave-made products. You use them in the factories, you use them as you move forward. So it was always an interconnected system. And we'll see kind of two things happening here. One, you can't disconnect American history from Black history because, it all happened together at the same time. And then two, there were forces that were driving this bigger than our plight. So I wanted to make sure I'm very clear about that as well. So as we talk about the types of labor that our enslaved ancestors did or were accounting for in the American economy, there was a wide ranging from our domestic roles. That's more along the lines of cooking and serving, washing, handling the children, sewing, keeping the home, keeping up the land. As far as the home is concerned, greenery out there, making sure everything was looking the way it was supposed to. Being in the house, we call those the house enslaved. And then we had our skilled laborers. I like to call them the artisans of the day, people who were blacksmiths, carpenters, bricklayers, tailors, furniture makers, etc. People who had and were given access to a very unique set of skills that separated them from the domestics in the house. And then the third category, the agricultural specialists and geniuses out there who faced the agricultural push, which was the majority. Long hours, physical labor, cotton, out the ground, out the mud, getting it out of the mud, which was, all were tough to deal with. But of all, you had more of a psychological war against those in the house and with the skilled, and you had more of a physical and a psychological toll being taken on the agricultural workers during that time. Another part, which isn't mentioned here in my deck here, is the human side of it all. So the way that you enriched yourself during that time is you created more slaves. So there were breeding farms. There were opportunities, unfortunately, for men to impregnate as many women as they could, women to carry as many babies as they could to ensure that your bottom line increased. As a part of the plantation business model, human capital was a premium. And they had a premium on it by being able to create as many as they wanted, depending on their economic outcome. So as you think about the domestic roles, the skilled role, and the agricultural role, the actual breeding of real life people, not animals, was taking place during that time as well. I won't go too far into this. We understand that agricultural production during that time was a driver. At one point, I like to call it the tech of that day. If we look at how the tech industry booms and what it does, agriculture was that for our country and for a lot of countries until we move more into the 1800s, where we start to see a lot more industrialization coming from we was Americans' mother Britain. So with that said, I want to take a step back and take a moment. I know that's a lot to process. I'll be able to answer questions. I'll be able to do that stuff as we move forward. But I want to really put a basis on this and respect everybody's time and get you out of here. So the key historical events and legislative milestones of this time, and this is where we're going to spend a lot of our conversation. So I'm going to get out of this screen of my deck here, and I'm going to bring up a timeline that I had assembled for us in our discussion here. And I'm going to share that, and we're going to use that as a basis to move this conversation forward. So I'm going to share my screen again, and you should see my timeline. So this timeline is a timeline that represents war and policy, law and war. And the reason why I chose law and war to have this discussion is because during the founding of this country up until the Civil War, there was a rock back and forth between what this country was going to be. One of the starting points of that was the Revolutionary War. And the Revolutionary War was such an interesting construct because it pit the one of the financiers of bringing the colonists to America was Great Britain. And over the time, the colonists started to build their own thing, you know, off the backs of Native Americans, off the backs of other indentured, and off of their backs as well. I won't take that away from them. They came over here, and through a lot of different ways, they built colony systems, monetary systems, and a state government systems that worked what it seemed like worked for them during that time. The Revolutionary War, I'm going to use a very cliche kind of thing. Was about taxation without representation as one part. So when we were taught about this in school, we were taught about the colonists throwing the tea over in the Boston Harbor and saying, you know, if we can't get a part of the action, we're not going to be a part of the taxing, which was funny because during that time, the same could be said for Native American folks and African folks who were here under those same circumstances. But I guess their plight wasn't as important during that time. And so to make a long story short with that, Britain came in, you know, the red coats are coming, that whole kind of deal. And there was a conflict between the colonists and Britain. To make a long story short, the colonists won, and it led to them having a convention about what this country is going to look like moving forward as a constitutional convention. And in that, well, I'll take a step back. During the Revolutionary War, it was important to know that Africans and people of color fought in that war, and some were baited with freedom to say, hey, you come fight on the behalf of Mother England, you can find you some opportunities and freedom and get up out of here. So many took that. We always had a want and a need and a taste for freedom. So that was something that we wanted. So we found it through war. If we couldn't find it through policy. So the Red Coats came, and they were willing to, though they had a checkered past in the golden triangle of transporting slaves as well, to win their war, an economic fight and a power fight between the two. They were interested in offering freedom to those who were enslaved, because during that time, the lines weren't drawn in the North. You had slavery in the North and you had slavery in the South as the colonies were building. So the Revolutionary War was a turning point for American strength and power and for what it meant moving forward. The Constitution moved forward. It was a constitutional convention, and the Bill of Rights was written, and America started moving forward with their hopes of not only domestic dominance, but international dominance. That would take me to the next step, was the 3/5 compromise. So as America was putting together its constitution and looking at, kind of where are we moving here? Where will the power be? The 3/5 compromise was basically this, and this is the long short of it. I'll pass some information that lets you go a little bit deeper, but the long short of it is the North and the South are starting to stake their claim in this country. They went from just individual states doing individual things to starting thinking about themselves more as a union, because they were able to fight off Mother Britain. They were able to maneuver in a way to build their own. They wanted their own manifest destiny. So basically the compromise was this. Down South, they wanted each slave to count as a person, because that number represented the seats in the House. It represented the amount you paid in taxes, and it represented your overall power in the country. Well, in the North, they were saying, well, look, they don't even have the right to vote, so why should they be counted? But because, the South was kind of in their bag, so to speak, compromise was reached to say, we'll count them as 3/5 of a person. So if you take all the slaves that were there during that time, all the enslaved Africans, they counted them as 3/5. So it gave the South a clear advantage in their political power, in their monetary power, and their ability to build the empire that they were looking to build. Coming off of that, and it didn't happen in this straight line. There was a lot of things happening while this was happening as well. But for the purposes of this conversation, to get us through the conversation, we're going to move forward to the Fugitive Slave Act. The first Fugitive Slave Act of 1893 was one that basically said, and this is more of a states' rights kind of a kick, to where states are responsible for the finding, the punishment, and the monetary rewards that went along with those who were enslaved seeking freedom. Again, at that time, America was more states driven than their national driven. Even if you look at the Constitution, it said they wanted a smaller national government and more states' rights. That might sound familiar if you've been listening to politics over the last few weeks, few months, few years. So moving from that, during that time, when you got to the Fugitive Slave Act, the reason why they wanted to put it in the hands of the states was during that same time, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, northern states were starting to lose their itch for slavery, not out of the goodness of their heart, well, maybe some, but by and large, it was because their economics were changing. Industry was starting up. England was starting to maneuver a little bit in their industry, and I'm moving a little bit ahead of myself. So that's the states up north were starting to say, well, while we don't want to actually be maybe equal, we don't think that this is fair either. So the North started, legislating through gradual emancipation, different ways to allow for those who were enslaved there to find freedom through lineage, etc. The next big law was 1807, the act prohibiting the importation of slaves. So up until that point, anytime you needed new cargo or property, you use the transatlantic slave trade, be that through the islands, what we call the Caribbean, up into Jamestown, Virginia, and up through our country. So, that was a very lucrative business model for the Spaniards, for the Britain, for the Americans, for anybody else who could get their hands in it. When you think about slavery, and this will be more in the 101 class, this was a global pursuit. This wasn't just a couple countries acting individually. These were some of the richest countries in the world putting their resources together to trade a commodity that was a human commodity that would help build these fortunes in all of these other places. So when you got to the act prohibiting the importation of slaves, it took American chattel slavery in border. And when I say that, it made it an American thing. So instead of being able to come from the Caribbean or coming from the motherland or coming from any of these other places in the diaspora, you had to build and breed your slaves domestically, which was, again, like I said earlier in the conversation, with all the breeding going on the breeding plantations, it made the commodity a lot more difficult to get. It made it a lot more of the supply and demand curves changed. And so it caused for there to be a very brutal step towards an already brutal system. Next in our takeaways through that time was the War of 1812. I like to call this American versus Britain Part 2. So in the 1770s, in the Revolution, American Revolution, the colonies won. The War of 1812, they're back at it again over a lot of issues that we won't get into today, but a lot still stemming from the loss that this big behemoth in Mother Britain taken over the colonists in America. Another part that makes this such an interesting point was, again, they're coming back, Britain coming back and saying, we're offering freedom. We're offering opportunities for those who want to fight on Britain's behalf. So many took them up and said, okay, well, cool. That's what we're going to try to do. And many fought in that war. Many enslaved Africans fought in that war as well, looking to get freedom, looking to go to Nova Scotia, other British territories along the way. This, again, was a turning point for the world and for America, in that in the 1800s, Britain is starting their industrial revolution that we would later start. And so the northern cities are seeing this like, man, textiles and factories and a new way of doing business away from the slow agricultural slavery model that the South are using to just boom. I like to call it like the Silicon Valley of the day. If you think about Silicon Valley, especially during the 2010s, 20s, the 80s and 90s, business boomed out of there. You did anything you wanted to. You saw businesses rise up. You saw venture capital moving. You saw things happening. And we haven't even talked about insurance on the boats, insurance on the bodies, insurance on the machinery. So many things, so much money, and so many opportunities were happening during this time that America is starting to question, the North is starting to question, the Union is starting to question, do we want to continue this, or do we want to find our way to brighter economic futures? Not necessarily was it, we want to do something so good for these good African folks, these good American folks born here. They were looking at, maybe it was a little bit of that, but it was more of an economic conversation. So that led us to, over time, 1812 to 1815, the Missouri Compromise. So as the nation is also growing, planners are trying to go west. People are trying to go west to expand the borders of America. And during this time, it was a situation where for each free state or each slave state, they wanted to balance it out with a free state. Remember, you have 3/5 of a personhood. You have the South booming their economy, sending it up north and sending it abroad. And so the North are looking for ways to kind of even the score, so to speak, in their plight for political and economic power as well. And so the Missouri Compromise said, basically, for each free state, we need or for each slave state, we need a free state, and there won't be any slavery above what we would call the Mason-Dixon line, today. And I'll have more information for you to go deeper into that as well. Next was kind of one of the final pushes towards slavery being an ending institution. You could tell, we were kind of getting there. Well, I guess we couldn't tell because we didn't know what was going to happen during the Civil War. So let me not use hindsight to say we were moving there. 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act. If you ever watched 12 Years a Slave, you can kind of get this kind of what happened. So the earlier Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 made it a state's responsibility. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made it a federal responsibility. So during this time, you've had, from the War of 1812 and the Missouri Compromise and all the way down into the Fugitive Slave Act, you had an active anti-slavery movement bubbling up in the North. You had the Underground Railroad and its many incarnations moving ex-slaves north, south into Florida, in the Seminole world, into New Orleans, trying to get to water ports to get up out of here. So you're having this kind of fight between two powers in the North and South. You're having a class of enslaved people who never enjoyed it, who never wanted it, fighting to run north, south, into Florida or in the New Orleans area or into waters. You had so many things bubbling. Mother England really taking a step forward in their industry and kind of reestablishing themselves as the dominant force. The Fugitive Slave Act put the onus on the federal government to oversee this process. So it was already hard getting through the states, going trying to get north or get to a water to get to north. Now it made it even more of a burden, more of a task, so to speak. And that kind of laid the foundation for what the Civil War would be. And the Civil War was a fight between the North and the South. The South seceded from the Union and said they wanted to move forward how they wanted to move forward in their own independent way. And the North was like, well, we'll see about that. And we'll get more into that as we move forward in our conversation. So again, just a quick rundown from the Revolutionary War through the 3/5 Compromise, the first Fugitive Slave Act, the act prohibiting the importation of slaves into the country, the War of 1812. I call it the Revolutionary War kind of remix, the remix, baby. The Missouri Compromise and the fight for the direction of this country economically and politically, down to the Fugitive Slave Act to really put a hold on all of those Africans moving. And then the Civil War, which was one of America's biggest atrocities. I won't get too far into it before we move forward. But at that time, it was such division. It was so much we would call fake news. It was similar to how things are kind of going now. Two sides that can't agree, two sides that see a different future, two sides that want something totally different. And unfortunately, during this case, it cost for the largest war and death toll in America on American land. So I'm going to stop my screen here and we're going to keep moving through our discussion here. I hope everybody is still with me. I know I see the comments here and the questions here. I can't see the slide deck. Okay, this is really good. Okay, I'm definitely trying to work through those issues. I thank you guys. I'm going to present here again to my deck, and we're going to keep moving through our discussion here. So now we're on the verge of the Civil War, but let's take a step back. We talked a lot about the South. Let's take a look at how the North was proceeding in their thoughts of abolition. So I'm going to go back to my deck here, and we're going to move forward. Yeah, I didn't use that. We already talked about that. So the Northern response. So this was an interesting kind of dynamic here. You had the economic ties between the North and the South. So you had an interdependence of the economies. And I see we had somebody join us on our Google Meet page. You'll see a message there. We're navigating this conversation over to our YouTube page and to our Facebook page. So you should see a message here in the next couple seconds to get you over to our Facebook and to our YouTube page. And I'll drop the well, I can't drop it. I'll have my help here drop us there. So can you guys drop that link for him, please? All right, so we were economically tied. The northern industry and the northern economical industrial industries relied heavily on southern cotton, creating a complex relationship that interweaved the economic growth of the institution of slavery. Financial mechanisms supporting slavery. The northern banks, like I mentioned earlier, the northern banks and insurance companies provided essential financial support to southern planters, treating enslaved individuals as collateral, perpetuating the economy. So even though we're talking about the direction this country was going, the North was benefiting and complicit in, up until that time, a legal notion that was going on in our country. And then also transportation networks, railroads, shipping routes facilitated the movement of goods and enslaved individuals, reinforcing economic ties between the North and the South's system there. So you see this kind of duality of, well, we kind of want to change what we're doing. Maybe not at the best interest of those who were enslaved, but for our financial interest. However, we do have a financial interest in what's going on down there. I'm speaking on the behalf of the North here. So you saw a rise of abolition going on in the North. You had the let's see here. I want to get to my notes and give them their props here. The American Anti-Slavery Society started in 1833. You had different kind of religious and political entities questioning the idea of slavery being fair, slavery being moral, and slavery being something that you want to move forward with. I'm from Battle Creek, Michigan. So Sojourner Truth is the lens by which we learned a lot of this history. Sojourner Truth, and we'll talk about her later. She landed in Battle Creek and settled there. And so a lot of my history about abolitionists came from growing up in Battle Creek, which was also a stop on the Underground Railroad. The Quakers in Battle Creek and the other freed blacks in Battle Creek. If you ever watched the Harriet movie, you saw what a free kind of Quaker society would look like, where there's still a hierarchy, but you still have free blacks that's looking to help the formerly enslaved to kind of normalize into society. And you have those who have the power, prestige, and the wherewithal to house, to educate, to normalize these formerly enslaved into society. And it wasn't just always out of the goodness of people's hearts. You had people with skills. We talked about the kind of work they were doing down south. We talked about the kind of brutality they faced in getting that done. So you're talking about a workforce who could come and immediately reap dividends for whatever you're working on. The only difference is there was an opportunity for them to get an economic output out of it instead of just being, left out of that equation. So there was a lot of networks. There was a lot of things happening, literature and media, the good work of a lot of people to ensure that this is happening. Just a quick aside, I wonder where, well, I won't say that. We'll keep moving. So as we think about the North, we definitely want to center it in, figures that are very important to us. Queen Mother Harriet Tubman, who we call Moses. And if you follow the Bible, you know what Moses did. Not only did she lead over 70 enslaved people to freedom and making trips back and forth, which is phenomenal. She also fought in the Civil War. She also was, someone who was unafraid to be known, to take her place. So we definitely want to give Queen Mother Harriet Tubman her love. Sojourner Truth. I'm from Battle Creek, so we'll never have a conversation about suffrage or abolition without having Sojourner Truth there. Her famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" Talking about suffrage, women's suffrage, and the being enslaved. And then finally, Frederick Douglass, who I'll have his book in our notes. Someone who had a very unique political, economic, and social perspective as we navigated through freedomhood. So we talked about this a bit. So, the tides are starting to turn. America is starting to want to go in another direction. The North, the South is kind of centered in what they're trying to do. So you're having this tension between America, the Missouri Compromise that we mentioned earlier, and Dred Scott, but we'll talk about that more as we move forward. And so we move forward towards the Civil War. Let me stop sharing my screen here and pull up a different resource. So I'll be sharing the slide deck out in the resources that I'm going to provide after the conversation. So I wanted to share this next graphic here just to kind of bring some a little bit of light towards the Underground Railroad system. And as we started to think about emancipation and running. Let me see. We'll get this up here. Give me just a second. And I'll pop it on the screen. All right, let's get this up. And we're still doing pretty good for time. I'll make sure that we're out of here at the designated time. And those who have to leave can go ahead and leave. I'll finish the discussion because this is also an on-demand course as well. So if you cut off your time and you got to jump, feel free to do so. You can go back and revisit the YouTube page or this Facebook page and get the rest of those notes. And I'll have the rest of those notes after our conversation as well. So I'm going to share my screen again, just so we can take a look at one version of what it looked like to maneuver through the Underground Railroad. So you can see, where we talked about our Missouri Compromise, where there will and where there won't be slavery, where you can see the free states in blue, the slave states in gray, and the Western expanded territory that was yet to be claimed here. So you see that there were many routes up. And when we talk about the Underground Railroad, it was a sophisticated set of networks of people, of houses, of paths that you took where you could find, I would say, a respite in your journey. So this wasn't, you got on a train underground and you went north. No, we went from one place to the next place. And it was kind of your responsibility to make it there and follow the informal rules of this network to get you where you're going. As you can see here, there was waterways that were taken. There were landways that were taken through the middle of the country, through the seaboard, up the northeast seaboard, southeast to northeast, down into Florida, into Seminole land, into Native American land, down into Texas, which was a Mexican land, a Mexican territory. And by and large, and of course there were cases, there was a push for the landowners to make it illegal for the Mexican government to take in, or for that line to be crossed. And the Mexico, or wasn't Mexico then, the Mexican territory did not adhere to that. And so, it was a problem with them because that's where people would run from down there. You saw even here through Missouri into Iowa, there were so many paths forward. And so we talked about the Fugitive Slave Act. We talked about all of these things that kind of made it America's business to stop this from happening. But though those things were in place, though everywhere you turned, you could be caught, killed, beat, whatever, it never stopped our people from attempting to look for personal freedom, familial freedom, economic freedom, etc. So I definitely wanted to share that, and this will be in the resources as well. We can't see the slide. Okay, so I'll make sure we can see the slides next time I bring them up, and I don't know what's going on with that. And they'll be in the deck as we move forward. So as we talk about the Civil War. So to make a long story short with the Civil War, and there isn't a short way to tell this story, but I'll tell it this way, and I'll provide the resources so you can go back and do a little more digging. The Union North fought against the seceded South, and one of the most bloody and dynamic battles we've ever had in this country. If you go back and you look at any of the resources, the South was not only conquered as far as the fight, but also their assets burned, the farmland, everything that they had was Northern property because they lost that war. And that led to what would be, well, let me take a step back. During the Civil War, a couple of things happened. One, the Emancipation Proclamation for enslaved people in war-torn places in the South were freed. That's where we got Juneteenth from. And then also there was many enslaved folks. Well, I won't say many. We can't think of any kind of group as a monolith. And if I've done that, I want to take a step back and say, there's always nuance. There's always exception. So even in those of us, and we can even see it in our contemporary society, while I believe no African wanted to be enslaved in America, there were maybe some that said, well, this is just the way it is, and we're going to deal with it and see freedom, in our next life. Some may have just not have had the wherewithal or the connections to make a move. Some wanted to run and find their way through. So even when Civil War was happening, you had some people like, well, I don't know what the Northern Yankee is going to do to me, but I do know what we got here, and I don't want to lose what I have here, whatever it is I have. So, we weren't a monolith then. We're not a monolith now. I'm not saying anybody was happy, anybody was wanting to be enslaved or any of that good stuff. But it was people who maybe weren't ready to make a move. There were people who said, you know what? If I'm a fight on the behalf of my landowner because I love him and he loved me, I might be his child. My mama might be his child. I might be in that lineage. I might have something coming to me. So it was a lot of different reasons people were making for whatever plight that they took during that war. I would like to believe that I would have been one of those, and I hope we don't get a chance to see it today. And this time would have been one of those that was trying to maneuver away for freedom, the same way we saw during the Revolutionary War that we tried, the same way you saw through the lens of the War of 1812, the same way you saw during it was the same thing that was happening during the Civil War. Yankees saying, hey, if you work on our side, we got something for you. And that's kind of a preview into what happened after the war ended. But I don't want to get too far into the war ended. I want to take a step back and have a quick discussion about, how these new opportunities for enslaved people in America. And again, we're still talking about the fringes here. We're not talking about the majority. We're talking about those who were able to run north, those who were able to find informal education networks through the Black church that we had down on Plantation. Those who were able to kind of get a book to read or get a little piece to read, or they overheard the landowner talking about the numbers, and they just, while they were working, finding a way to figure things out, because we always had that ability. We weren't cattle. We weren't dogs. We were people. So when we heard things, it stayed with us. When the Bible was being read, people would say, all right, well, I'll take a cut out the Bible. And this says thee, thou, though, they. Well, now I know what these words are, and I'm going to keep adding them up. And we all get together on our Sunday nights. And while they think we over here dancing and singing, we over here learning and doing what we got to do. So there's always been a rebellious system. Also, and this was something that was in the deck, but since we can't see it, I don't want to keep bringing it up. There were rebellions along the way. Many Africans weren't happy with this. And if you think about some of the larger, or even some of the smaller plantations, one plantation owner could have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slaves. So, we getting it popping. If you ever saw the J. Cole video for GOMD, he's playing on the idea of a rebellion. And I'll drop that link to a rebellion on a plantation where, more of the light skinned, high yellow house people came and was working with, you know, the field and the artisans and saying, hey, let's make a move and let's do it here. So even through rebellions, even that's why they had to keep tightening the laws, because people were rebelling and running, rebelling and running, rebelling and running. It wasn't just like, we so happy, yeah, we're singing these songs. They didn't know the songs we were singing was follow the drinking gourd. That's the way to get up north. Wade in the water, Moses is on her way. All of these songs, oh, they were having so much fun and singing these songs. Nah, we were, Pac say on a song, bomb first, plan, plot, strategize, and bomb first. That's what we were doing. Not all of us, because we weren't a monolith, of course, but those of us who had freedom on their minds, who had opportunities on their mind. It was never a situation where people were just happy and content with seeing freedom in one view and being enslaved for their whole life. And if we go back to the image that I showed earlier, slavery was a long time. So those were some of the entities and some of the elements that brought us there. I want to have one quick discussion about education, and then we'll move on. So during the 1800s, and you really start to get to the 1830s, is when you start to see educational institutions that later we call HBCUs or whatever we want to call them, being birthed out of the Quaker community, religious organizations, other supporters and the like. And we had, 1837, Cheney University opens its doors. 1851, the University of District Columbia, known as the Minor Normal School to educate Black women. 1854, the Ashland Institute, founded in Chester County, Pennsylvania, today known as Lincoln University. 1856, and this is prior to, and I'll have this graphic, this is prior to Civil War. This is prior to all these things happening. So when I was talking about the enslaved people going north, these institutions were being established to say, well, this is how you normalize in society. This is how you kind of navigate. This is what you do. And of course, it wasn't, I'm not Pollyanna-ish to believe that it was here's, have everything that we have. It was still under certain circumstances. Of course, we never get it twisted. And then Limon Owen College, established in Memphis by the United Church of Christ. 1854, Wayland Seminary, with the Richmond Institute, merged with the Richmond Institute to be the Virginia Union University. And I'll stop at 1865 with the Bowie State University, was founded as known as the Baltimore Normal School. So, you started to have some of these further distinctions into what we're going to talk about moving forward into the Du Boisian talented 10th conversation, and the Booker T. Washington up by your own bootstraps mentality, and your Garvey globalist, nationalist, separatist philosophy. So some of these things are really starting to bleed themselves into our society. Again, as you see America looking to be more of an industrial nation, putting railroads across the country, connecting the country that way, textiles and industry, things that they saw Mother England doing over there, and we're looking to move here. So a lot of these elements are coming together to create what we have here. So this was a lot for the first discussion. I didn't take a lot of questions, and that was because I just wanted to lay a basis and a foundation. I also want to talk about kind of what we have moving forward with our next steps. So as we go through our next steps here, and I want to go to my banner here. Parting shots in our next steps. So the first thing is, one, you will get a replay of this conversation. You'll get the outline that I shared with some earlier. You'll get the deck, and you'll get my resource guide for week one. The week one resource guide will provide links to documentaries, YouTube videos, books, that one you can use to go further in anything that we talked about today. You'll also get an invitation to a Facebook group where we can further our discussion, where I'll post those materials as well, where we can keep the discussion going, where we can build community. I went fast over a lot of stuff. So if something went over your head, or you need more information, or you want to find more resources to help support you, we can do that. And then you'll get also, by midweek, you'll get the outline for our conversation on Reconstruction. And I wanted to leave just a couple moments to talk about that. So after the Civil War ends, the North wins, you see four major economic or laws that have a huge impact on African-American people. Freedmen known at that time. That's the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, The 14th Amendment, which gave due process and citizenship to African Americans, those who were formerly enslaved. The 15th Amendment was the right to vote, and the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which kind of fortified the 14th Amendment. And what was so impactful about those laws are it allowed for African American people to finally, throughout the country, enjoy their economic and their political and social rights. So again, we talked about earlier, this group of people weren't dumb, lazy, ignorant fools. These were agricultural wizards. These were domestic wizards. These were geniuses in the artisan space and every other space that our economy had. So you had an opportunity to actually cash in. You had a way to get education now. You had a way, and for a short time, government oversight, northern oversight, land ownership, the right to create contracts, the right to testify in court, to run for office, to establish things on your own. And we'll see a really big push there. I want to thank each and every person that joined today. I want you to share this opportunity with those who may find this useful. And I also want to be ready to go on a journey where it's a lot more collaborative. This one was more of an opportunity to lay a foundation and to let you know where we're going. But we're going to spend the majority of our time case studying. So when we talk about what the 14th Amendment looked like, well, let's apply that to this case here, and let's analyze how it happened. When we talk about the Du Boisian philosophy, we're going to talk about a case study of, well, look at these people who did it this way and built this. How can we use that to move forward? So it's going to be a lot more interactive. It's going to be a lot more economics driven. I kind of stayed away from a lot of the economics in this conversation because I wanted to establish the political and the social kind of foundation. But as we move forward, we will take a case study to talk about the American economy from 1870s to 1770s to 1800, from 1800 to 1850. So we can actually look at what's this slave labor or enslaved labor produced, and those economics that we were responsible for, but we weren't able to see the benefits of. And then as we move forward with our discussions on Jim Crow, we take a look at those economic philosophies of Du Bois, of Washington, and of Garvey, and showcase how we were able to build Black Wall Streets across the country, how we were able to enterprise, how we were able to navigate even through those tough times. And that separation were the seeds that led to how civil rights were able to navigate. And I won't go too far into that because I see where we are for time. So what I want to do is I want to take a moment. I said a lot. I want to center us for a moment, and I want to have some final thoughts. So one, our people are a great people. We've navigated through a lot. We've seen times worse than we see today. We've seen a world worse than anything politically that can happen to us. And one thing that I wanted to do with my time and my expertise was provide an outlet, provide a space, and provide information that can take us from being worried and in a tizzy and in a fight to saying, well, no, all I got to do is look back to look at if they can get through that, we can get through this now. If they were able to navigate fugitive slave laws and an entire system to keep them down, we can navigate executive orders. If they can navigate running freedom and building through Reconstruction, we can navigate through what's in our face today. If they can find a way through all of that to still plant the seeds that eventually were civil rights, we can do the same. So while we see the news, while we see everything happening in our world, we can never lose sight of our ancestors. And then as we get that understanding, we use that, and we'll tie in the Earn Your Leisure book to say, how do we navigate some of this stuff in a 2025 sense? How do I take a Du Boisian idea and use it now? How do I take a Garvey idea and use it now? How do I take a Booker T. Washington ideology and move it now? So that's basically, what we're going to be talking about moving forward. I want to thank everybody for their time. I'm about to end this stream. If you have any questions for me, I can be reached at dbarnesj@gmail.com, or you can leave a message for me under this video, or you can leave one under the Facebook video. Again, thank you for your time. This was African American Studies intro course 477 Independent Study. I'll be seeing you next week at 1 o'clock, same place, same time. We'll be talking about Reconstruction, and we'll be talking about how we use that to make some economic gains. We have 59 minutes and 57 seconds. I'm going to get us out of here at the 1 hour mark. I appreciate everybody's time. Enjoy the Super Bowl. I should have had on my Jalen Hurts jersey because that's my main man, and I'm going for them tonight. All right, y'all. Peace.